A little while ago, Amber said that she's been hearing from people talking about the fever that this is the best movie they've watched.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, because of everything that happened, and you're in the middle of it.
Millions watched it happen. The tears, the trembling voice, the 4 words that silenced an entire arena. I have no choice but to leave. In that moment, Sophie Cunningham wasn't just another WNBA player. She was a symbol of something raw, something painfully human. The clip spread like wildfire across social media. Analysts replayed it frame by frame, fans argued in comment sections, and even those who had never watched a WNBA game suddenly wanted to know what broke her. To outsiders, it looked like an emotional outburst in the heat of competition. But those who had followed Sophie's journey sensed it was something deeper, something years in the making. Because this wasn't supposed to be her story. Sophie Cunningham was meant to be one of the league's brightest stars, the underdog who defied the odds, the player whose fire lit up arenas and inspired fans around the world. Yet somehow, that same fire had burned her from the inside out. Behind the cheers, the stats, and the polished post-game smiles, there were cracks forming, slow, invisible, and dangerous. And when they finally split open on national television, the world saw not an athlete, but a human being unraveling in real time. It left everyone asking the same question: what could drive someone so passionate, so loved, to walk away from the game that defined her? The answer, as it turns out, isn't simple. It's a story about pressure, perfection, and the collision between 2 powerful personalities, one on the court, one on the sidelines, whose visions of greatness could not coexist. To understand what happened that night and why it shattered one of the league's most inspiring players, we have to go back to where it all began. Before the tears, before the headlines, back to the rise of Sophie Cunningham. Before the tears and the headlines, Sophie Cunningham was the heartbeat of every team she touched. From her first college game, she played like someone who had something to prove. Every possession, every dive for the ball, every celebration screamed of a player who refused to be ordinary. At the University of Missouri, she wasn't just another name on the roster. She was the roster's energy source. The kind of athlete who could ignite a crowd with one shot and change the tempo of a game with nothing more than her presence. She was never the tallest, never the fastest, but her determination made up for every physical limitation. Coaches called her a competitor. Fans called her fearless. Teammates called her a spark. Because when Sophie was on, everyone around her played harder. Her signature three-pointer, that quick release with a hint of defiance, became her calling card. When the ball left her hands, the crowd already knew what was coming. And when it splashed through the net, she'd flex, let out a shout, and stare down the opposing bench with the kind of confidence that made even veterans take notice. Her game was defined by emotion, not in a reckless way, but in a way that made people feel something. She didn't just want to win, she wanted to make every play matter. It's why she dove across the floor for loose balls and fought through screens twice her size. It's why her celebrations became memes, her reactions gifts, and her fan base one of the most loyal in the WNBA. She wasn't playing for fame, she was playing for belonging, for the sheer love of competition. Off the court, that same authenticity carried over. Sophie wasn't trying to be brand, she was just herself. Her Instagram showed dogs, family dinners, goofy smiles, and heartfelt captions about mental health and gratitude. Fans connected to her because she wasn't pretending. She made success look attainable, like she was proof that if you worked hard enough, cared deeply enough, you could make it too. By the time she entered the WNBA, she'd built more than a resume. She'd built a reputation. The underdog with a big heart, the player who never quit, the emotional engine every team dreams of having. And for a while, it seemed like the league had found its next fan favorite. But passion, as powerful as it is, comes with a cost. And for Sophie Cunningham, that same fire that made her unstoppable would soon meet a force equally intense, one that wouldn't just challenge her skills, but test the very core of who she was as a person. Because when Sophie met Stephanie White, the story of inspiration began to twist into something much darker. When Stephanie White took over, there was an unspoken shift in the air, a tightening of expectations, a new tone in the locker room. White wasn't just another coach. She was a former player who had walked the same hardwood, fought through the same grind, and earned her place through sheer intelligence and discipline. Her reputation preceded her. She was known as the kind of leader who could take an average roster and mold it into a playoff threat, not through charm, but through control. White's coaching philosophy was simple. You do things the right way, or you don't do them at all. Every detail mattered. Film sessions weren't optional marathons, they were mandatory dissections. She'd pause plays mid-frame, rewind, and replay, not to humiliate, but to correct. Though, to some, it didn't always feel that way. Her approach demanded precision. Players were expected to know not only their roles, but their teammates' roles too, to anticipate movement before it even happened. For veterans, that level of accountability felt empowering. For younger players, it felt suffocating. White didn't sugarcoat mistakes. If a rotation was late or a defensive switch missed, she called it out, sometimes in front of everyone. Her tone wasn't cruel, but it cut deep because it came from conviction. She believed that honesty, even the brutal kind, was respect. I'm not here to coddle you, I'm here to make you better. And for many, it worked. Her teams became sharper, faster, more disciplined. They started winning.
But intensity has a way of bleeding into everything. Practices became quieter, laughter rarer. Players stopped joking around before warm-ups. Every drill felt like a test, and every mistake like a verdict. The locker room that used to hum with energy now carried an invisible tension. The kind that sits in your chest and makes breathing just a little harder. Sophie Cunningham, at first, respected White's structure. She wanted to win. She wanted to be coached hard. But as the season wore on, that respect began to blur into strain. For someone who played best when she felt free, when emotion fueled her confidence, the rigid environment began to chip away at her spirit. White wasn't the villain. She was doing what had always worked for her. But when her relentless pursuit of perfection met Sophie's emotional, heart-first approach to the game, something fragile began to crack. It was two different kinds of passion colliding. One rooted in control, the other in feeling. And neither woman was willing to bend. The team didn't know it yet, but what started as a quiet friction between coach and player was about to become something the entire league would see, live in front of millions. Because when that tension finally boiled over, it wouldn't happen behind closed doors. It would happen under the brightest lights possible. At first, no one thought much of it. Sophie Cunningham was still hitting her shots, still smiling during pre-game warm-ups, still showing flashes of that fiery energy that had defined her career. But if you looked closely, really closely, you could tell something was off. The spark was still there, but it flickered instead of burning. The fire that used to light up her entire team now felt like a controlled flame, dimmed by something she couldn't quite name. Teammates started noticing small changes. Sophie, the player who used to blast music in the locker room and crack jokes before practice, had gone quiet. She began showing up just on time instead of early, and left right after drills ended. The once effusive energy that pulled teammates together now hovered somewhere distant. On the bench, her eyes followed plays, but the grin that used to come with every big shot wasn't there. Her famous celebrations, the flex, the stare down, the smirk, had disappeared. It wasn't that she stopped caring. If anything, she cared too much. Every word from Coach White started to land heavier than before. Each correction, each moment of public criticism cut a little deeper. What used to motivate her now stung, and as much as she tried to shrug it off, the constant scrutiny began to erode the confidence that had always set her apart. Reporters noticed the shift too. During press conferences, Sophie's tone grew more measured. Her answers felt practiced, safe. Gone were the raw, passionate sound bites that made her a fan favorite. Instead, she spoke in polite, careful phrases, the kind that sound fine on paper, but reveal nothing. When asked about her relationship with her coach, she'd smile and say, "We're focused on winning. That's all that matters." But her eyes told a different story. Behind the scenes, the tension was no longer subtle. During timeouts, the exchanges between White and Cunningham were curt, mechanical. White's voice, sharp and controlled, echoed off the hardwood as she demanded focus. Sophie would nod, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the clipboard, but clearly somewhere else. It wasn't open conflict, not yet, but it was a silence that said more than words ever could. Her performances reflected the emotional strain. She was still productive, still doing her job, but it felt robotic. The instinct, the creativity, gone. Her movements were precise but empty, as if she was playing to avoid mistakes rather than to make plays. The passion that once made her unpredictable and dangerous had been replaced by hesitation. Fans noticed. Commentators began to say she looked off, but no one knew how off. Her teammates tried to reach out. Some offered encouragement, others tried to joke around to lighten the mood, but Sophie's smiles didn't reach her eyes anymore. Even her family, watching from afar, could sense it. Calls grew shorter, messages went unanswered. The girl who once loved every moment on the court now seemed to be enduring it. It's often said that a player's body language tells you everything you need to know, and Sophie's body was screaming what her voice couldn't. Something inside her was breaking. The game that once felt like home was starting to feel like a cage, and the cracks that started small were about to split wide open, live under the bright glare of national television. Because the next time the world saw Sophie Cunningham, she wouldn't just be a player under pressure. She'd be a player unraveling in real time. It happened on a night that was supposed to be routine. A nationally televised game between two playoff contenders, the kind of matchup that fills highlight reels and post-game panels. The arena was electric, the stakes high, and Sophie Cunningham, as always, was expected to rise to the occasion. But from the opening minutes, something felt off. Her movements were tight, mechanical. Her shots fell short, her defense a step late. The energy that once radiated from her was gone, replaced by something brittle. Midway through the third quarter, the tension that had been building for weeks finally detonated. The team trailed by 8, momentum slipping fast. Coach Stephanie White called a timeout, clipboard in hand, barking out orders as players gathered around. Cameras zoomed in, as they always do, catching every expression, every gesture. White pointed toward the court, her tone sharp, her words clipped, the kind of intensity viewers expect from a coach in crunch time. But then, something shifted. Sophie's face changed. One moment she was focused, listening. The next, her jaw trembled, her eyes glassed over. And then, the moment that froze a league, she broke. Tears streamed down her cheeks, sudden and raw, like a dam giving way. She tried to hide it, wiping at her face, turning slightly away, but it was too late. The cameras had already caught it. The unfiltered pain, the emotion she'd been holding back for weeks. The image was jarring. A professional athlete, live on national TV, visibly unraveling while the game went on. The broadcast team fell silent for a beat, unsure what to say. The director didn't cut away. They lingered, too long. The camera panned in closer as Sophie tried to steady herself, towel pulled over her head, shoulders shaking. Behind her, White continued to speak, still in game mode, drawing up a play on the whiteboard. Whether she hadn't noticed or refused to acknowledge it, no one could tell. But the contrast was striking. A coach demanding control, and a player losing hers completely. When the timeout ended, Sophie didn't return to the court. A substitute took her place, and she remained on the bench, head down, towel draped over her like a curtain between herself and the world. Teammates glanced at her, some placing a hand on her shoulder, others frozen, unsure how to respond. The atmosphere in the arena shifted, from intensity to discomfort. You could feel the unease through the screen. Thousands of fans watching a deeply private moment play out in a very public way. After the game, she left the court quickly, bypassing the handshake line, disappearing into the tunnel before reporters could reach her. Stephanie White's post-game press conference lasted less than 5 minutes. When asked about the incident, her response was cold, clipped, and final. "That's an internal team matter. Next question." But there were no next questions. That clip, Sophie's tears, White's blank expression, the towel over her head, had already gone viral. Within minutes, social media erupted. Hashtags exploded across timelines. Hashtag Free Sophie. Hashtag What Did White Do? Hashtag Let Her Speak. The footage replayed endlessly on ESPN, analyzed frame by frame like a forensic study. Theories poured in. Was it burnout? Was it bullying? Was it something deeper? By the next morning, every sports talk show in America was dissecting it. One side defended White, claiming that elite sports demand toughness and emotion shouldn't cloud performance. The other side called it a public humiliation, arguing that no athlete should be pushed to the point of breakdown. Sophie had become more than a player overnight. She was now the center of a national debate about coaching, mental health, and humanity in sports. But while fans and pundits shouted from every corner of the internet, Sophie herself said nothing. Not a single statement, not even a vague social media post. Just silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. And as that silence stretched into days and then weeks, one thing became clear. What the world saw that night wasn't an isolated moment. It was the tip of something much deeper, a story that went far beyond basketball, and one that was only beginning to unravel. The moment Sophie Cunningham's tears hit the floor, the WNBA had a controversy it couldn't contain. Within hours, the clip was everywhere, replayed on ESPN, debated on podcasts, clipped into TikToks with dramatic music and millions of views. It wasn't just sports media anymore. It was mainstream. Headlines read like movie trailers, the breakdown that rocked the WNBA, coach or tyrant, the Stephanie White debate, what really happened to Sophie Cunningham. Every network wanted a piece of the story. Analysts dissected the footage like it was a crime scene. They zoomed in on White's expression, slowed down Sophie's movements, even analyzed the timing of her tears as if the truth could be found in the milliseconds between command and collapse. But the truth was murky, hidden beneath layers of emotion, ego, and perception. And that's exactly what made it viral. Social media became the courtroom. On one side, fans defended White's nonsense style, calling her a victim of the soft era of sports. They argued that greatness requires discomfort, that Sophie's emotional outburst, while sad, was proof she wasn't built for elite pressure. On the other side were those who saw something darker. They saw emotional burnout, power imbalance, and public humiliation. This isn't leadership. This is breaking someone down until there's nothing left, one viral tweet read. Former players started weighing in. Some supported White, reminiscing about old-school coaching and how they'd been yelled at worse. Others, especially younger athletes, told a different story. They spoke of coaches who blurred the line between discipline and damage, how tough love sometimes turned into something toxic. One ex-player even shared her own experience of being mentally dismantled by a coach's constant criticism, describing how she learned to play scared instead of free. Her post blew up, and suddenly, Sophie's story wasn't just about Sophie anymore. It was about every player who'd ever felt crushed under the weight of perfection.
Think pieces flooded the internet. Journalists explored gender dynamics, how women in sports are expected to be both fierce and composed, passionate yet professional. They asked why emotional expression from female athletes is often labeled as weakness, while men's outbursts are seen as passion. Sports psychologists appeared on talk shows, explaining how chronic stress and public criticism can trigger breakdowns in even the strongest competitors. The phrase emotional burnout became the buzzword of the week. Inside the league, things grew tense. The WNBA issued a careful statement, emphasizing its commitment to player well-being while refusing to comment on the incident directly. It read like PR perfection, sympathetic, neutral, and ultimately meaningless. But the WNBA Players Association took a different tone. Their statement hinted at something deeper, calling for respectful communication and healthy team environments. To insiders, it was clear the union was ready to push back if they had to. Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham was nowhere to be seen. No interviews, no press conferences, not even a social media post to calm the storm. Every day of silence made the world more obsessed. Was she suspended? Was she recovering? Was she leaving the team for good? Reporters camped outside practices, hoping for a glimpse. When Sophie finally did appear on the sideline days later, the cameras caught every frame. Her expression distant, her eyes tired. She clapped for her teammates, but it looked forced, like muscle memory rather than emotion. The storm didn't just fade, it grew. Every small moment was magnified. A short benching? Headlines. A half-hearted smile? Think pieces. Even silence became a story. The situation had evolved beyond a player-coach disagreement. It had become a cultural reckoning. Conversations about mental health in sports were no longer side discussions, they were center stage. And while the media argued, the fans speculated, and the league calculated its next move, one thing remained painfully clear. Sophie Cunningham was breaking in front of millions, and nobody, not her team, not her coach, not the league, seemed to know how to stop it. But what came next would prove that Sophie wasn't done speaking. She just wasn't going to do it with interviews or sound bites. Instead, her message would come through in a way far more haunting and far more human than anyone expected. When the cameras finally stopped chasing her, Sophie didn't speak. Not to reporters, not to her coach, not even to the fans who had spent weeks defending her online. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She went quiet. And in that silence, she began to tell a different kind of story. One that wasn't spoken in interviews or press releases, but written between the lines of her posts, in the shadows of her words. It started subtly. An Instagram story with a black background and a simple quote. Some battles are fought in silence. No hashtags, no explanation. Just that. Fans immediately knew who she was talking about, or at least they thought they did. Within hours, the screenshot was everywhere. Then came another one, this time a line from a song. When your spirit breaks, no amount of talent can fix it. The comment section flooded with heart emojis and messages of support, but also questions. Was she okay? Was this a goodbye? In the following days, her posts grew more cryptic. A photo of a stormy sky over an empty court. A caption that read, "The body keeps the score. The mind remembers what the heart tries to forget." A mirror selfie with tired eyes and the words, "Still standing." She never mentioned her team, never mentioned her coach, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew what these fragments meant. Sophie's feed became a diary, one written for millions to read, but only a few to understand. It was raw, poetic, and strangely restrained, the kind of honesty that comes only after you've said everything you can and still haven't been heard. She didn't post about training sessions or game days anymore. There were no highlight clips, no behind-the-scenes smiles. The cheerful energy that once defined her online presence had been replaced with something heavier: reflection, exhaustion, truth. Fans began piecing the puzzle together. Reddit threads exploded with theories. Some said she was hinting at being mistreated by the coaching staff. Others believed she was simply burned out, a victim of emotional fatigue that had finally boiled over. One viral post claimed an inside source told them Sophie had been mentally drained by a toxic environment. Whether true or not, the speculation only grew louder. And yet, through it all, Sophie never corrected anyone. She never denied the rumors, she never confirmed them either. Instead, she let the silence hang, not as weakness, but as defiance. It was as if she had realized that anything she said could be twisted, dissected, used against her. So she did the only thing she could control. She stopped giving them words to use. Those who knew her best, family, close friends, a few teammates, spoke carefully in interviews, describing her as taking time to heal, reflecting, focusing on herself. Each statement sounded like a euphemism for something deeper, something none of them dared to put in plain language. Even her teammates' social media began to change. Subtle likes on her posts, vague messages about standing by people who need it, and cryptic quotes about loyalty and truth.
What made it even more haunting was how calm Sophie seemed. There were no rants, no emotional explosions online, no public statements demanding justice. Just a steady stream of quiet resistance, a reminder that silence, when used with intention, can be louder than any shout. The longer she stayed silent, the more powerful her presence became. It wasn't just a player who'd gone quiet. It was a statement about pressure, about power, about what happens when the love of the game turns into something that drains the soul instead of fueling it. Sophie Cunningham's silence was not empty. It was filled with everything she couldn't say out loud, every breakdown hidden behind the word discipline, every sleepless night disguised as preparation, every crack that had been painted over with mental toughness. And the more she said nothing, the more the world started to listen. Because deep down, everyone knew, silence like that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from pain too deep for words. And for Sophie Cunningham, it was clear that the story wasn't over. It was only shifting into a new chapter, one that would blur the line between rumor and reality, truth and speculation. And soon, those whispers about what really happened behind closed doors would grow into something impossible to ignore. When silence stretches too long, people start filling the gaps, and in Sophie Cunningham's case, those gaps became battlegrounds. With no official statement from her, the team, or Coach Stephanie White, the internet did what it always does. It built its own story. Some parts were based on whispers from sources close to the team. Others were pure speculation, pieced together from social media breadcrumbs, body language, and a few too many anonymous posts. But together, they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. The first rumor claimed that Sophie's breakdown wasn't a single emotional slip. It was the culmination of weeks, maybe months of tension behind closed doors. Reports suggested that White's accountability-first coaching style had crossed into something more personal. One insider told a local journalist that Sophie was being singled out during practices, that she was often the focus of harsh critiques even when others made similar mistakes. Another said the dynamic had turned emotionally draining for several players, though most stayed quiet to avoid becoming targets themselves. Then came the whispers about the locker room. Fans noticed that teammates who once commented on Sophie's posts had gone silent. A few unfollowed her on social media, fueling theories of internal division. One viral Reddit thread claimed there had been a heated exchange between Sophie and White weeks before the televised breakdown. Not a shouting match, but a private confrontation that left both visibly shaken. Whether it happened or not, no one confirmed, but the timing lined up too perfectly to ignore. There were also reports, unverified but persistent, that the coaching staff had grown frustrated with Sophie's emotional leadership style. Some alleged that she was seen as too expressive, that her energy, once praised as inspiring, was now labeled as distracting. Fans called it hypocrisy. The same intensity that made her a fan favorite was now being punished behind the scenes. They loved her when she was the spark, but not when her fire burned too bright, one fan tweeted. Meanwhile, a different theory started circulating, one less accusatory, more tragic. According to this version, it wasn't about conflict at all, but exhaustion. People speculated that Sophie had been playing through mental and physical burnout, juggling the constant pressure to perform while dealing with personal struggles no one knew about. Sometimes the strongest people break quietly, one sports psychologist said during a TV segment. And when they do, everyone acts surprised, even though the signs were there all along. Still, not all the talk was sympathetic. Some corners of sports media doubled down on the tough love narrative, insisting that emotional breakdowns are part of the game. If you can't handle criticism, you can't handle championships, one analyst said bluntly on a morning show. But that comment didn't age well. Fans erupted, accusing the show of romanticizing emotional damage. The debate wasn't just about Sophie anymore. It was about every athlete pushed past their limit in the name of discipline. Through it all, neither Sophie nor Stephanie White said a word. The team's official channels stayed silent, even as the internet burned with speculation. Each passing day without a statement made the mystery grow. Some fans started digging into practice footage, post-game interviews, even sideline interactions from earlier in the season, searching for clues in every look, every gesture, every hint of tension they could find. And maybe that's what made the story so gripping. No one knew what was true anymore. There were facts. Yes, a public breakdown happened. Yes, Sophie had gone silent. Yes, the league was clearly treading carefully. But everything else lived in a gray area, floating somewhere between rumor and reality. Still, one truth cut through the noise. Something had changed in Sophie Cunningham. Whether it was conflict, exhaustion, or something deeper, the athlete who once played with boundless energy and joy was now a symbol of something heavier. The cost of chasing perfection in a world that demands strength but punishes vulnerability.
As the speculation reached its peak, the world waited for closure. A statement, an interview, anything. But none came. Instead, Sophie's story lingered in the public consciousness like an unfinished song, looping endlessly between empathy and judgment. And that's when people began asking the question that would outlast every headline and hashtag. Was this really about one player and one coach? Or was it about something much bigger? Because behind the rumors and theories, one uncomfortable truth was emerging. Maybe Sophie Cunningham's story wasn't an exception at all. Maybe it was a reflection of a culture that still doesn't know how to handle emotion until it explodes on live TV. In the end, Sophie Cunningham's story became more than a headline, more than a viral clip dissected in endless slow motion. It became a mirror, reflecting back everything we don't like to talk about in sports. The pressure, the perfectionism, the quiet, invisible exhaustion that builds behind every smile and post-game interview. What happened that night wasn't just about a player breaking down. It was about what happens when a system built on toughness forgets that its players are human. For years, Sophie had been celebrated as the embodiment of passion, fierce, fearless, unstoppable. But when that same passion turned to pain, the narrative shifted. The same emotion that fans once called inspiring was suddenly labeled fragile. And that's the heart of it. In sports, emotion is celebrated when it fuels performance, but punished when it reveals vulnerability. Sophie's tears weren't weakness, they were honesty. And in that moment, honesty looked uncomfortable to everyone watching. Stephanie White wasn't a villain either. She was a product of a culture that values discipline above dialogue, a coach trying to push her team to greatness using the tools she'd been taught. But somewhere along the way, the line blurred. The pursuit of excellence can become cruelty when empathy disappears. White demanded accountability, Sophie needed understanding. Both were right in their own way, and that's what makes the story so painfully human. Two people who wanted to win, but couldn't find a way to win together. The aftermath of that night forced uncomfortable conversations about mental health in sports, about leadership, and about how much pressure is too much. It exposed how easily the human side of competition gets buried under expectations and performance metrics. Fans, coaches, and even fellow players started to look at the game differently. Suddenly, mental toughness didn't just mean pushing through pain, it meant knowing when to stop, when to speak, and when to protect your peace. Sophie Cunningham's silence, her posts, her disappearance from the spotlight, they weren't acts of defeat. They were boundaries. They were her way of reclaiming control in a world that had taken it from her. By saying nothing, she said everything. I'm done being your story. I'm ready to write my own. Today, that viral breakdown still lingers in conversations, not as a scandal, but as a symbol. It reminds people that strength doesn't always look like stoicism. Sometimes it looks like breaking down, standing up again, and choosing to walk away. Because maybe Sophie's tears weren't just a moment of collapse. Maybe they were the first sign of something shifting, a silent rebellion against the expectation that athletes must always be unshakable. In showing her breaking point, Sophie Cunningham reminded the world that vulnerability is not the opposite of strength. It is strength, just a different kind. So yes, that night shook the league. But maybe it needed to. Maybe it forced everyone, coaches, fans, and the league itself, to finally see the human beneath the jersey. And maybe for the first time, the WNBA wasn't just watching a player fall apart, it was watching someone find herself again. Because the truth is, Sophie Cunningham didn't lose that night. She simply stopped pretending she couldn't feel. And in a world that demands silence from those who hurt, that might be the bravest thing an athlete can ever do.